Hello everyone, I hope you're well and having a nice 2025. So today I'm talking with Joanna Moncrieff. Joanna is Professor of Critical and Social Psychiatry at University College London and is also a consultant psychiatrist practicing in the NHS. Joanna has written a number of books within the field of critical psychiatry, which is a sort of reflexive enterprise that endeavors to reflect upon the ethical, um, the efficacy, ethics, and philosophy of psychiatry. And this conversation is predicated upon a 2022 review which Joanna conducted and subsequently led Joanna to write a book which is being released on the 16th of January. It's called Chemically Imbalanced: The Making and Unmaking of the Serotonin Myth. And that will be accessible on Amazon from the 16th of January. So I'll put a link in the description if you're interested. And in this book, and then which we talk about in this conversation, Joanna sort of tracks the origins of the serotonin hypothesis of depression, where it came from, um, essentially citing economic and social forces which were brought to bear upon it, and actually highlighting really the sort of perhaps paucity of scientific evidence for the hypothesis, um, or ostensible finding rather, that serotonin is causally implicated or even actually implicated in depression, which is really interesting. As Joanna talks about here, that in her findings from the 2022 review, not only is serotonin not causally have any causal role in depression, it doesn't appear to be even correlated with depression, which is controversial, and Joanna acknowledged that. So yeah, if you've ever wondered how is serotonin implicated in depression, or is it, this is an interesting conversation, I think. So yeah, enjoy and yeah. Yeah, so I guess what is the serotonin myth of depression? Yeah, and where does it
Yeah.
come from?
So the reason we did that review is because people have been saying in the psychiatric community for a long time that there isn't any evidence for the serotonin hypothesis of depression, even though it's been widely disseminated and is widely believed to be, or has been widely believed to be true by the vast majority of the general public. Most people thought that it had been established, not that this was a theory or a hypothesis, but that it had been established that there was a link between serotonin and depression. This was brought home to me when I realized that some very intelligent philosophers that I knew believed that this was the case. And I went and did a talk to the academic German department at UCL at one point, and again, all the people there in that department were really surprised when I suggested that actually this link had not been proven. They all thought it had been. So, so for several decades now, the public have been led to believe that there is a proven link between serotonin and depression, even though many people in the psychiatric establishment knew that actually this had not been demonstrated, this had not been proven. So I thought it was really important to get the evidence together and publish a paper that said this very clearly, that said this has not been proven. And so that's what we did. I got together a team, and we went through all the research in the main areas of research on serotonin and depression. And because there's been, a lot of research over the last few decades in this area, what we did was we looked at the systematic reviews and meta-analyses that have been done in each of these areas. So we looked at research that has brought together all the research in the different areas. Um, and got that research together, and then came to a conclusion based on that. And basically, I can summarize the findings very, very succinctly. We found that there was no convincing evidence for links between serotonin and depression in any of the areas of research that we looked at, and these are the main areas of research that have been done. Um, so so that paper came as a surprise to a lot of the general public, and I think it came as somewhat of an embarrassment to some sections of the psychiatric profession who tried at one and the same time to say, oh, no, no, it's not news, we knew that, and to say, oh, no, but serotonin is involved. There is evidence that it's involved after all. Um, so that was the sort of confused reaction from the profession. The the serotonin theory, although it's been around since the 1960s, the first chemical imbalance theory of depression was actually to do with noradrenaline, another brain chemical transmitter. But the serotonin, and that was created in the 1960s. But the serotonin theory came in soon after, and had been a popular theory in psychiatry, even though it was never the case that there was any very strong evidence to support either the serotonin or the noradrenaline theory. But it really caught on among the general public from the 1990s onwards because of a very concerted publicity campaign by the pharmaceutical industry at the point of the release of the what we now call SSRI antidepressants. The first one of those, the first one that was widely used was Prozac, and then there were several well-known ones that came afterwards. Paxil or Seroxat, it's paroxetine. What else? Lustrol, sertraline, lots of these, and then the SNRIs came along, the selective noradrenaline and serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which are a little bit different chemically, but have been basically marketed in the same way. So it was pharmaceutical industry advertising that really persuaded people that a link between serotonin and depression had been established, and the psychiatric profession never really stepped in to correct that false impression that was being created by this pharmaceutical marketing. And so that's how we ended up with this situation that the majority of the population believed that there was an established link, whereas actually there was never any convincing scientific evidence to suggest that was the case.
Mm. Yes, which is extremely significant, and there's a number of implications from it. What it sounds like to me, if I'm hearing correctly and from reading it correctly, it's not just because I suppose traditionally within at least spheres of psychiatry, there, it's sort of I guess what we might call sort of neural reductionism. This idea that depression is caused somehow by the primarily through some sort of aberrant condition of the neuronal architecture or connectivity, or sort of a depletion in certain precursors of serotonin. So there's the causation, but the study, the review you did in 2022, actually that serotonergic disturbances cannot be significantly sort of identified as being implicated at all. So it's not just that there's no significant disturbance.
So that's a really good point. Um, we so to establish causation, you would have to establish not only that there is a link between serotonin and depression, but that the abnormality of serotonin comes first and is somehow precipitating the low mood. And we found basically there wasn't even evidence of any link. So
Mm.
there was no evidence of an association or correlation, let alone a causal connection. Another research group did an interesting study a few years before ours. I think it was published in 2019,
Hmm.
which looked at biological theories that where people
Sorry, can
have.
can you hear me?
I can hear you. You've gone fuzzy.
Yeah, that's fine.
Have I gone fuzzy or?
No, no, you haven't. Bear with me. Um, that's better. Try that. Sorry.
Yeah, okay, that's right. Yes, I can see it again now. Um, so this group, led by someone called Kennis, can't remember their first name, I'm afraid, looked at research that has tried to establish whether a particular biological abnormality precedes the onset of depression and therefore might possibly be a causal factor. It's significant that they didn't include any research on serotonin in that paper, because none of the research has adequately established that any abnormality of serotonin precedes the onset of low mood, or has even really been set up in a way that it could have revealed that sort of connection. But they looked at a number of different factors. They looked at some hormones, stress hormones, for example, thyroid hormones. They looked at some aspects of the gut, and some metabolic factors and some others. And basically, they didn't find any evidence that any of these biological markers were associated in a causal way with depression, i.e., that there was an abnormality that preceded depression that could have been a causal process.
Yeah. And so then does all of this, in your mind, relate to this idea? I don't know if you could call it, yeah, I suppose framework or idea, which you've spoken about in previous books, which is, and I suppose this further confirms perhaps some of your hypotheses around what what psycho or sort of pharmaceutical uh, uh, therapeutic drugs are doing. To you, does this sort of further suggest that it's the disease state model versus the drug-based model? Would you
Yeah,
comment on that?
yeah. So I've um, for quite a few years now been putting across the idea that we are mistaken in our general understanding of what psychiatric drugs like antidepressants do. So the general conventional understanding is that these drugs work by reversing or targeting an underlying biological process that is a causal process that leads to the onset of the symptoms of depression or psychosis or anxiety, or whatever state it is that we're concerned with. Um, and I've been saying that there's no evidence that any class of psychiatric drugs works in that way. Um, and so, of course, this paper that showed that there was no evidence for links between serotonin and depression um, is further support for that view, that the thesis that psychiatric drugs work by targeting an underlying abnormal biological state is not supported by evidence. So that view is what I call the disease-centered model of drug action. There is an alternative way that drugs can be thought of as acting. I don't want to say working. Sometimes we might think it's useful and that they work, but sometimes we might not. But as acting when they are given to people with mental health problems. So the drugs that we give to people, psychiatric drugs like antidepressants, drugs for anxiety, drugs for bipolar, drugs for schizophrenia, are all what we might call psychoactive substances. That is, and by that I mean drugs that change the normal state of the brain. They cross the blood-brain barrier and they change the normal state of the brain. If you give them to an animal, you will see changes in that animal's behavior. It might be quite subtle with some drugs, or more obvious with other drugs. If you give them to a person who doesn't have a mental health problem, a normal volunteer, they will also experience changes in their mental state, in their level of consciousness, for example, maybe in their emotions, and in various other aspects of their mental activity, and sometimes of their behavior, their overt behavior as well. So these are what we might call mind-changing drugs. They change the normal state of the brain, the normal state of brain chemistry. And so what I've been saying is that what happens if you give these drugs to someone who has a mental health problem like depression or anxiety is you superimpose the changes that are produced by the drug onto the underlying problems. And we can see this most easily if we think of alcohol. Alcohol is another mind-changing drug, another psychoactive substance.